Okay, so good evening, everybody. So as Karen said, I've written a fantasy novel, Mystical Greenwood, and published many short works, poetry, short stories, and essays. And one other literary announcement on my career: the sequel to Mystical Greenwood, Beneath the Deep Wave, is coming out this Friday. So hooray for me!
Yay. Good job.
Thank you. So I first talked about this subject of word and page count on my blog years ago, and it was actually a former president of this chapter, Victoria Clarkson, if you know her. She actually suggested it. This is a possible presentation topic when I was trying to think of other things to do, so thank you to Victoria. So now let me share my screen, my PowerPoint, so that way we can get started. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, can everybody see it?
Yes.
All right, wonderful.
Yes.
All right, so let's dive right in then. So now some of you might be thinking, like, does it really matter to count the words or the pages? Or does it even matter? Well, let me tell you, like when people see books on the shelves, that's usually like the first thing they'll notice how thick it is, and generally, therefore, they will say there's a lot of words or not that many. But let me tell you, these things really do matter, and not just for writing for prose, and also from what I saw earlier, it sounds like a lot of us are prose writers here. And I wanted to ask also, is there anyone here writing or interested in writing for the stage or the screen? So do we have anybody interested in possibly trying those out sometime in their career? No, nobody? Well, nevertheless, if you ever do think you might want to try that, this will also be important as well. So let me get down to the next one. So as I said, like when first thing you will see with a published work is, along with the cover title, the author, you'll see how thick it is. And sometimes with work to work or even from edition to edition, it might look a little bit different. So again, do word and page count matter? Well, the answer is yes. And going forward, now, while they do count for both, the way this presentation is structured is basically word count will carry more weight than page count when it comes to writing like books, fiction, or even nonfiction. Whereas if you're going to write drama, then page count carries more weight. All right. So basically, when you've got your book written and you're ready to submit it for publication or to marketing, agents and publishers and readers will often have their expectations about books when it comes to genre, and yes, that will include how thick it is. And the word count ranges also will offer basically guidelines to meet those expectations. So for publishers, it's books they can sell, or readers, books that they love. And it will vary depending on the genre as well, and the reading level, and even what they're labeled as. And we will talk more about that very soon. But also, never forget there will always be exceptions. So don't feel too nervous yet if you haven't really thought about it that much. But before we proceed, I want to ask another question. Has anyone here ever written a query letter to either an agent or a publisher? No. Did you include
Yes.
in your... And did you include in that query letter like a either rounded up or rounded down word count of your... So
Yes.
There you have it. That's an example of why word count matters, especially when you're writing a novel, because the agent will want to know how long it is, and they will say, especially if they hear the genre, is this something I can sell? What will the readers want? So then, here are some different word count ranges based on genres and different resources I found. And I will share my notes at the end, when I get to the end of the PowerPoint, I will share my notes in the chat. So, like, as you can see, like, the farther down you go, like in terms of reading levels, so like for children, it's a lot shorter, like for picture books, but when you go up to middle grade or young adult, then it gets even higher. And those genres that are speculative, and when it comes to prose, speculative means, you know, like fantasy, science fiction, or even horror, so supernatural stuff. And I wanted to say that now because when we get to drama, that word will have a different definition. Yeah, they will generally have a larger word count, especially because, as you might expect, they have all that world building where you have to explain things that are not, like, you shall we say, something you would find in every day. And by these different sources, you can see that it varies from source to source. So there is a bit of leeway when it comes to expectations. Now, I want to mention also, this kind of blends page count and word count too, but chapters often have their own individual word counts too, which can be translated to these kind of pages. So as we see here, like some would say between 1,500 and 5,000, so, or even shorter than that, like 3,000 to 4,000, so that's like 8 to 10 pages. And even by genre, people might expect different lengths. So if you're writing a mystery or a thriller, or even a YA, shorter chapters that gives you the feeling of a quicker pace. So whereas if you have a longer one like fantasy, that might, you know, slow the pace down. So if anyone is thinking of, you want a fast pace or a short pace to your work, that's one way to do it. And that is important too, and I can speak to you from my own personal experience. When I was originally writing Mystical Reread, I had half as many chapters that were twice as long. But I've read books with really long chapters, and this is just me, so don't take my word for it if it's different for you. But at night when I go to bed and I start to get drowsy, sometimes if I've not finished a chapter, I try to find a place to stop. And if it's long chapters, that's a little more difficult. So that's what influenced me to ultimately split the chapters I had in my first book in half. All right. So now we come to some terms that you may have heard of when it comes to word count or classification. And this, again, is a marketing tool. So I'm sure everyone's heard of flash fiction, short story, and novel, certainly a novella, and possibly novelette. And like the genres, you can see there are different word count ranges that people will expect in what you label them. So let me ask, has anyone ever set out to write either a novella or a novelette, or have they thought about calling it that in the past? So, well, I'll tell you that doesn't surprise me at all. Or, oh, Nadia says yes and yes. Okay. Well, the reason I was not surprised is, again, it comes back to marketing and what can sell. So let me tell you a little bit more about those terms. So according to the Merriam-Webster.com, the terms novel and novella first came to use in the 17th century, and then novelette came in the 18th, and then by the 19th, we had the short story. So novellas, they came about, typically it says the Renaissance, so novelettes were short stories that were considered romantic or even sentimental. And then by the 20th, we had flash fiction, which is broken down even further. So here are some terms you may or may not have heard of. So as you can see down here, we have more word counts. So of course, with different word count length ranges, that will in turn influence how complex your story is. So typically, short stories will focus on a single event or a single character, and many people would say they can be read in a single day. Novellas, on the other hand, they can include subplots and more characters, certainly more so than novelettes. And both can be thought of as a long short story or a short novel, and I'll get into that again in a minute. So novels, therefore, You read them over multiple days, no surprise, and they will have multiple subplots. But yes, but the fact is, novellas and novelettes are increasingly harder to publish by themselves, especially if you label them like that. And this quote I found from this article in The Guardian perfectly illustrates why. So the organizers, and it was British, that's why it's spelled with an S, of NaNoWriMo say, "We don't use the word novella because it doesn't seem to impress people the way novel does." They're right, which is a shame, as there are some wonderful writers out there who rarely, if ever, overstep the 300-page mark. So yes, and I will tell you, when I've opened up a title page, I've never seen anything labeled really as like a novella or novelette. And I mean, don't take my word for it. There may be some out there, but I would never see that like on a title page. Like, I'm more likely to see the long short story or the short novel. So I'll use and sometimes even if there are literary movie adaptations, it's the same thing. Like on Wikipedia, I've seen Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol has been called a novella, but like when they roll the opening credits for any movie, I've never once seen it called that. It always says, based on or adapted from the novel. So, and it's kind of sad too, because it's really marketing. The word novel sells, just like probably short story when you're going through an anthology. But yeah, if you want it by itself, it seems calling it a novel really is the way. Gives you an edge when it comes to selling. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead too far. So now we come to the drama. So I remember none of you said you're interested at this time, but if you ever do want to try becoming a playwright or a screenwriter someday, the reason page count counts more here is because, unlike a book where you're writing for just one person or individual people to read on their own, or book clubs that meet over time, drama writing is done for an audience. So consider if you're like in a movie theater or you're sitting in front of a television, you don't really want to, unless you really love to binge stuff all day long. Generally, you wouldn't expect people to just sit in front of a screen all day, or if in a theater, to sit in a theater for like hours at night. So, and certainly with both, there is they each have their own formatting for how they would determine what actually counts as a page, but that's another discussion altogether. But certainly in the world of screenwriting, most would agree that one page of a screenplay is equivalent to roughly a minute of screen time. And in fact, this was actually first presented to me years ago at a meeting of this very chapter, where we had someone whose background was screenwriting talking about the formatting, and also he brought this page count up. So if you're going to write a typical movie screenplay, and I remember he put it, you want to shoot for 100 to 120 pages of the proper formatting, and he even said, better yet, aim for 110. And this would be especially good for if you're writing your first screenplay on your own time and dime, as opposed to a solicited. So this is where the word speculative comes to mind. So something to know, a speculative screenplay or spec script is simply a screenplay that the writer writes on their own. So they're not hired to do it. You write it on your own time and dime with the hope of selling it. So yeah, definitely if you're going to do that, aim for that page count. And if you're going to write a TV series, so depending on how long, typically, again, if it's just episodes are half an hour or they're an hour, then you would go for 30 to 60 pages. And likewise, it seems plays would have a time constraint of their own. So these are some I found from some of my sources. So yeah, full-length plays. So if you want to think of it similar, that's kind of how long typically you might want to go for. But as always, there are exceptions to all these rules. I mean, there are definitely movies out there like Gettysburg that are hours long, or plays like Shakespeare's Hamlet. Like Kenneth Branagh, I know, he did an uncut Hamlet, which was over 4 hours long. So that's how long Hamlet is. Kind of makes you wonder if Shakespeare had written his two plays, or if Gettysburg had been a TV series as it was originally planned, how things might have been different. So again, back at the beginning, I said that word count carries more with writing with prose and page count with drama. But if you want to consider the reverse, does page count carry weight in prose and does word count carry weight in drama? Well, if you're writing a longer piece of prose and you're worried about chapter length, as we mentioned before, then yes, certainly page count is a good way to do it. And that's how I try to balance my chapters when I'm writing. And same with production costs. And this would go more into formatting, which is kind of another discussion altogether. But sometimes people, for the sake of reducing the page counts so they don't have to pay as much at the production, they run the risk of just cramming too much in. So it's kind of trying to find that balance. But all the same, this became apparent to me not that long ago when I decided Mystical Greenwood needed an internal makeover. So I changed some of the formatting around, stuff like, some of the margins and the font pitch. So that basically did reduce the page count a bit, which will hopefully make production costs a little smaller. But if you're going to go that route, just always bear in mind you don't want to cram too much into one page. And certainly, yes, if you're concerned about getting an agent, whether you're pursuing drama or prose, then yep, you definitely want to consider both. Or in drama, if you want to keep that page count down, then yep, bearing in mind the word count will help you get down to the bare bones and make the plot clear. Because that's another thing I picked up from the screenwriting presentation we had years ago. So, like, I think as he put it, the equivalent to being a novelist in the film world is being the director, not the screenwriter. So, like, if you want to use like, I always use the Frankenstein monster analogy, all the screenwriter does is assemble the skeleton. Like, everybody else in the business will add all the organs. So, well, I realize I'm going really fast, so I apologize for that. But yeah, these are just some basic takeaways. So again, all these terms are subjective, and it's really at the mercy of the publishing market. So, while you're writing your piece, you want to tell your story and tell it well. Just bear in mind when you get to the marketing part that this is where these things will matter. So the shorter your word count, the more concise you're going to have to be, whereas the higher your count, the more complex. So like if they will say the word count is low, maybe you got to add some more like scenes or subplot, or if it's too thick, try to cut some stuff, find out what can be cut. And it's true. And sometimes also bear in mind, sometimes contracts will require that. In fact, I think when I was watching it was a 3-episode documentary on Agatha Christie hosted by the historian Lucy Worsley. They mentioned, I think for her book, The Mystery of the Blue Train, she had to have like over 75,000 words per her contract, and she was struggling to get over 50,000. So yeah. And like I mentioned earlier, internal formatting can influence your page count, but the most important thing there is to make sure it's readable. And above all of that, don't sacrifice your vision. I mean, so the important thing for the writer to remember always, the story is counts, so make it as long or as short as you want it to be. So this is my website. So if any of you want to find out more about my writing or find some resources or get some writing tips, like my website and blog are there, and I will put that in the chat as well with my with the notes that I mentioned earlier. So let me stop sharing my screen and let me upload those now. So first I'll put my website here. All right, get the notes there in a minute. All right, so can everybody see those? So they should be in the chat right now. Oh, Stephen, you're muted.
Oh, okay. Now I see it.
Okay. Oh, thank you for the compliments, everybody. I'm glad you enjoyed that part. And oh, I see Karen. I see you were interested in writing a screenplay too. I missed that. My apologies. I certainly hope some of these tips will help you as well. So I want to open it up now to Q&A. So does anyone have any questions about word or page count, or anyone want to share their own experiences perhaps with these concepts when it comes to like marketing or writing?
It's definitely important when you send in query letters. Some publishers actually require you to mention what your word count is or what your page count is, and also to send several pages of the book. So word count is very important to them.
Yep. Very true, Stephen. Again, because it all comes down to what their concern is, what we can sell. So that could be a signal, to say it's too long, too short, or just right, like the Three Bears. So
Andrew, you had mentioned that you don't want to call it, or they don't want to call it, a novella. I have seen movies based on novellas, but they are in the 50s, from like noirs from the 1950s. But if today the word novella doesn't work, does that mean that you have to extend the story to become a novel, or is there another thing you can call it?
Oh, not at all, Joanne. So I guess my point was, like novellas are real. People do call them that. I guess just when it comes to marketing, I think I don't see the word novella a lot. Like, because again, going back to my example of A Christmas Carol, which at least on Wikipedia is labeled a novella, like that's been adapted to movie and television many times. But like when you roll the credit, like when you see the opening credits, I've never once, when they see like, adapted from by Charles Dickens, I've never once seen the word novella. It always says novel.
Oh, so, interesting. Okay.
I guess my point is the word novel seems to be a better like word to use when it comes to marketing, especially if you want it to stand alone, or you could say a short novel, as mentioned before.
Oh, okay. Very good. Thanks.
Yeah, if you want to call it a novella and market it as such, that's entirely up to you. It's just, it seems like, especially like in the traditional world, it seems the word novel is it just seems to be the better word to use if you want to market it better.
Okay.
Kind of sad, but true, it seems.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so I see like someone said they wanted to write a novel for their Christmas romance. So I think that was you, Susan. Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few romance authors with big names, that's what they choose to do at Christmas. So you'll get those books, and they're usually 40, 50, 60,000 words. And they usually take characters from a series and just kind of give them just the holiday theme. But I don't see them typically in my genre unless it's like for something special or a farewell that an author's writing or some special incident, but usually for Christmas.
Oh, I misread your comment. My mistake.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and certainly if a novella in the series might be good, certainly I think if you're part of a series, that might make it a little bit easier. Again, it's just, don't take my word for it. It's just from what I've observed. It seems novel is a better word, a more marketable word than novella. So, and Nadia, you mentioned novella's okay with literary markets as a chapbook. So a chapbook is another word I think that's a good one to use for marketing. So I think you're muted.
Yeah, you didn't mention on length as far as literary, so I'm taking it that your presentation is aimed on purely commercial type of publications that need an agent. So I just wanted to throw out, if someone is more of a literary bent in their pursuit of writing, that there is a growing market in the academic university presses for the shorter work and independent presses for chapbooks, and which is an avenue that I'm personally have been pursuing with success.
Oh, certainly. And that's a good point. And because I certainly don't want anyone to think that I'm, against, writing a story to make it a good story. Certainly, I would say, the story comes first always. I think this prison was just more geared towards the marketing side.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, like when you're writing day by day, I mean, word count, I would say, is a great way to keep track of your progress. I mean, that's how I keep track of how much progress I do every day. Like when you look on, in my case, I use Word. Yeah. It's only when you get to the marketing and trying to sell it, that's when these things really come into focus, but not so much during the writing. So anybody else want to share or any questions?
Or if you're self-published author, it gets important on Amazon. When you're setting up your author central, you have to, and if you're buying a book off of Amazon, for example, I always look to see what the word count is.
So let me see what else questions here. So Ali, you asked if there's a recording repository. I mean, I think that I'm not sure how I can answer that. I mean, it might be you could temporarily do it, but I don't think they keep them forever. So, and Stephen, you asked if there's a better word than novel for a large work of fiction like historical fiction.
Andrew, I don't know if my question is listed as you to everyone, me, but you is me, and that's because I just don't know how to get my name on there as opposed to the word you. Maybe you can enlighten me.
I mean, if you go down the bottom of chat and like where you type your message, if you see where it says everyone, you click on the little blue button and then you can change it from everyone in the meeting to someone specific to make it a private message.
Oh, okay. But what if I want to make the from my name rather than the word you? Is it showing up to everybody else as Stephen Glazer to everyone?
I can see it.
Yeah,
Oh,
yes, it is.
okay.
So,
Okay.
but
I didn't know because it's telling you.
So, I mean,
but in any event, yeah, that this is a question because I write historical fiction, and typically it's very long. I'm not sure if my word counts are longer than even the ones you mentioned for novels. But is there a word to describe a fiction book other than a novel that's like larger?
Two words come to mind off the top of my head. One is epic, as the other would be tome, Tome.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I'm reading one now by another member, Louis McIntyre. His second historical work, which I definitely think would fit into that category. So, but again, there's always exceptions.
I haven't gotten to War and Peace yet. I haven't written War and Peace yet, so I'm not going to call it epic yet, or epic.
Nadia asked, dividing it into two books. Well, I mean, certainly authors have done that, though not all of them have always been, I know, have wanted to do. Example of that would be J.R.R. Tolkien. He originally wrote The Lord of the Rings as one book. It was his publishers who said, we need to split it. Nobody's going to buy anything that thick. So he didn't want to, but they made him do that. And I think also they had like a war. There was like a paper shortage because it was like during war or whatever. But certainly, and yeah, I've often wondered, as I said, if the movie Gettysburg had been a TV series as they originally intended, or if Shakespeare had written Hamlet as two plays like he did with his Henry IV. Yeah, I mean, things could have been the production could have been very different. But that's really, I guess, up to the writer if they feel it would still work with their vision if they could split it or not. But I mean, yeah, I would say it was successful for Tolkien, though he certainly didn't like the title for the third one, The Return of the King. He thought that was a spoiler. So, Allie, it seems the longer the work, the shorter the version of novelette. So, no, interesting. All right. So, is there any? All right. Anybody else? Is there anyone I missed? All right. Well, in that case, then I will stop recording. So thank you all again for coming out tonight. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. And I definitely hope that some of the information will help you in your future endeavors.